Our minds take shortcuts to help us to understand the world and make quick decisions. Because it takes so much effort to see things differently, we're biased to keep the same view about things, even when faced with new information that challenges our beliefs. Unfortunately, these cognitive biases often cause us to get things wrong. In this video, we'll look at 9 common mind traps and how you can avoid them. 1. Confirmation bias. Frank loves coffee and thinks that drinking coffee every day will help him to live longer. He ignores counter-arguments that drinking too much coffee may have health risks and continues to argue the benefits of coffee drinking to his friends. This is an example of confirmation bias, or the tendency to seek out and interpret information in a way that supports our pre-existing views. Frank looks for every piece of information that supports his belief that coffee's good for him, whilst dismissing any information that contradicts his views. Although coffee is not a particularly contentious subject, topics and beliefs with a lot of emotion are more likely to lead to bias. Confirmation bias can limit our exposure to new information and perspectives, affecting decision-making and creativity and giving us a closed-minded view of the world. To overcome this bias, we need to seek out diverse views that challenge our beliefs, whilst being critical of their assumptions and potential biases. 2. Anchoring bias. When Steve Jobs unveiled the first iPad, he told the audience that pundits predicted a price of $999. This price appeared for some time while he spoke. When it came time to reveal the actual price of $499, everyone watching felt that the iPad was an incredible bargain. Of course, back in 2010, no one had any idea what an iPad was worth, as it was a brand new product, yet everyone felt as though they'd just saved $500. This is an example of anchoring bias, which causes us to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we're given when making decisions. Had Steve Jobs shown an anchor price of $199, everyone would have felt like they were being ripped off. Anchoring bias skews our judgment and prevents us from considering other options. To overcome this bias, we need to remind ourselves of how initial information influences our decisions and actively seek out additional information and alternatives before arriving at a decision. 3. Attribution bias. Frank is late for an important meeting. He's late because he needed to call an ambulance for someone who was hurt in a car accident. As he stops to catch his breath, his colleague Don thinks to himself, he's so lazy and unprofessional. This is an example of attribution bias, or the tendency to explain another's behaviour by referring to their character or personality while attributing our own behaviour to situations beyond our control, like the time Don was late and blamed it on bad traffic. To avoid this bias, we need to wait until we know the full picture. It's also helpful to put ourselves in another's shoes to understand their actions first. 4. Halo effect. Our overall impression of a person, brand, or product can shine like a halo so that perceptions of one aspect carry over to other aspects. One example of the halo effect is our tendency to view attractive people as kind, intelligent, likable, and even better leaders, even though these traits are unrelated to physical attractiveness. But it doesn't stop there. For example, people who are sociable or kind may also be seen as more likable and intelligent. When perceptions of one quality bias judgments of other qualities, it can impact decision-making and lead to prejudices in judgments about people and situations. To overcome the halo effect, we need to stay open-minded, objective, and gather more information before making decisions. 5. Availability bias. Instead of analysing all the information that's available, we often make decisions or form opinions based on information that's recent, frequent, or extreme. For example, after reading a news article about a shark attack, Frank now has an exaggerated perception of danger in the sea, despite the likelihood of a shark attack being incredibly small. On the other hand, he's grossly underestimated the risk of sunburn and the importance of wearing sunscreen at the beach. Availability bias can skew our perception of reality and lead to inaccurate decision-making. To overcome this bias, we need to seek out multiple sources of information and avoid making decisions based solely on what comes to mind first. 6. Dunning-Kruger Effect. Socrates is thought to have said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." But due to a cognitive bias called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, knowing how little we know is actually very difficult to do. We can illustrate this graphically by plotting confidence in our ability against our actual knowledge. When we start learning something new, we're often overly confident in our ability. That's because we don't yet know how much there is to learn and we feel like we know everything. This is sometimes, perhaps a little harshly, known as climbing Mount Stupid. The more we learn, the more we realise just how complex things really are, and the less confident we become, plunging down into the valley of despair. This is the point where many people give up. But if we keep going, we can become more knowledgeable and almost as confident in our ability as we were at the beginning of our learning journey. Sometimes the loudest, most confident person in the room knows the least. Those in the middle underestimate their knowledge, and the most knowledgeable are less certain and more hesitant to give their opinion because they, more than most, understand the true complexity of things. One of the best ways to avoid overestimating our ability is simply to gain more knowledge about something. The opposite of the Dunning-Kruger Effect is imposter syndrome, which you can learn more about by clicking the link above. 7. Ostrich Effect. The tendency to avoid unpleasant but potentially useful information is known as the ostrich effect, after the prevalent myth that ostriches bury their head in the sand to avoid danger. Unfortunately, information avoidance often makes things worse than if we just tackled things head on. Imagine you've been using your credit card a lot recently. You know you should check your account balance but avoid doing so because of feelings of anxiety. Because you don't check it, you may fail to curb your spending habits and end up in more debt. The ostrich effect is not the same as laziness because we go out of our way to avoid negative information. Although it can be tempting to bury our head in the sand, it's best to stay focused on the bigger picture and use negative but helpful information to our advantage to achieve long-term goals like financial freedom. 8. Negativity bias. Unlike the ostrich effect, in which we go out of our way to avoid negative information, negativity bias is the tendency to notice and dwell on negative events, information or emotions more than their positive counterparts. It's thought to have evolved to keep us vigilant to threat. It's the reason why we're often drawn to more depressing articles in the news, something the media has known for a long time. To avoid this bias, it's important to learn to recognise unhelpful thoughts that are running through your mind, and to replace these with more helpful ones. 9. Spotlight Effect. The tendency to overestimate how much people notice us is called the spotlight effect. For example, we might think others are observing and judging our appearance at a party and feel embarrassed because we spilled a drink on ourselves, when in reality others are paying little if any attention to us and are likely more concerned with their own appearance and behaviour. This bias can make us feel overly self-conscious and lead to social anxiety. But the more we realise that other people aren't paying attention to every little thing we do, the less nervous or embarrassed we're likely to feel in social situations. We may be the central character in our own lives, but to many others, we're just an extra in the background. Were any of these cognitive biases familiar to you? If so, which ones do you experience most often? Please let me know in the comments below.